Hi everyone. So this is part 2 of chapter 3, cell. In this part 2, we will discuss the cell membrane. So just remember again, a cell consists of cell membrane, and there are two layers in the cell membrane. Okay? And then inside the cell, there is a cytoplasm with cytosol and organelle. The biggest organelle is the nucleus, the control center of the cell. Inside the nucleus, there is chromosome that carry DNA or genetic materials. And the closest organelles to the nucleus will be ribosome. And then ribosome actually attached to a bigger organelle. It's called the RER, rough endoplasmic reticulum. And close to the RER, there is another endoplasmic reticulum that do not have ribosome. Therefore, it's called smooth ER, smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Both of them will be close to an organelle that modify proteins and lipids. It's called the Golgi apparatus. And Golgi apparatus will produce the products, maybe enzyme or hormones, and that product usually carried by smaller organelle that is produced by this Golgi apparatus. These smaller organelles like lysosomes, proteosomes, and peroxisome. And in order to be able to perform this process, the cell needs energy or ATP, and this energy is produced by mitochondria. Now we will focus our discussions on this cell membrane. Cell membrane. In order to know the structure, we're going to learn the function first, because functions usually will be related to the structure. The structure will tell the function. Now, what is the function of cell membrane? Of course, because cell membrane is the boundary of the cell, the primary functions will be for protection. And the second function is actually for controlling the movement of molecules in and out the cell. So control movement of molecules, whether in or out from the cell. Okay. And in order to control these movements, the cell membrane has the ability to select, okay, to make a selection which molecules can be entered, which molecule can be exit the cell. So which molecule will not be able to cross the cell membrane. This characteristic is called as selective permeability. Okay, the ability to select or control which substances or molecules can enter or exit the cell membrane. We will discuss how the cell membranes are able to perform this selective permeability. In order to know that, we have to know the structure of the cell membrane. Cell membranes consists of molecules is called the phospholipid molecules. The phospholipid molecule is a molecule that have two parts. The first part is called the head, and the second part is the tails. So there is one head and two tails of phospholipid molecule. This head is actually hydrophilic. Okay, so this is a polar side. Okay, that is hydrophilic. Okay, hydrophilic mean love water. So philic mean love, hydro mean water. The tail is actually lipid. Okay? So the head is composed of phosphate. Okay? Phosphate or phosphorus. Phosphor. Okay? And the tail is actually lipid. Okay? Remember, lipid is hydrophobic molecule. Phobic mean or phobia mean fear, hydro mean water. So these lipid molecules, they fear water. They will not dissolve in water. So hydrophobic molecule is also known as non-polar. Okay, so this is non-polar side. So as you see over here, the phospholipid molecule, it has two sides. The phospho side, which is the head, and it is hydrophilic, polar. And the two tails is actually lipid, which is hydrophobic, fear water, or non-polar side. And this is the reason the name is phospholipid. Okay, so this molecule is called the phospholipid. Now, if we see that, then when these phospholipid molecules arrange in the cell, okay, the head will face water because they are hydrophilic, they love water, while the tail will be away from water because they hydrophilic, they fear water. So you know that in the cell, okay, we have inside the cell cytoplasm with cytosol, which is ICF, okay, intracellular fluid, and this ICF is actually water, okay. And outside the cell, there is another fluid. It's called a ECF, extracellular fluid. Which is actually also water. Okay, so if you see inside the cell is water, outside the cell is water, then the phospholipid molecule will be arranged one layer, eh, the one that facing the outside, the ECF, the head will facing the ECF. So the head will facing the ECF, Okay. And there is another layer that is facing the ICF, the cytosol. So the head will be facing the ICF, the cytosol, the water inside. Okay. And then there is another layer facing water outside. Okay. So they make this arrangement. Then when they combine, then what happened? We have two layers of phospholipids that make the cell membrane. Okay, so this is the reason why the cell membrane is also known as phospholipid bilayer. Bi mean two, so phospholipid bilayers, which is the membrane that has two layers of phospholipids molecule. So this is the main frame of the cell membrane, which is consists of phospholipid bilayer. In addition to this phospholipid bilayer, which is the what we call the framework of cell membrane, okay. In addition to this phospholipid bilayer, there is also molecules that present in the cell membrane. One of the molecule is called the protein. So the proteins will be also present in the cell membrane. And there are two types of proteins based on the structure. The first one is the protein that crossing the cell membrane, and this protein is called the integral protein. And the second type of protein is the protein that do not cross the cell membrane, maybe just present inside or maybe just outside. So this protein is called the peripheral proteins. Okay, so the framework of cell membrane is phospholipid bilayers. There are proteins, whether integral or peripheral protein. And there is another type of molecules in the cell membrane, and this molecule is called cholesterol. Okay, cholesterol. And remember, cholesterol is lipid. Right? So lipid. So it is fear water. This is hydrophobic. So if we know this characteristic that it is lipid, then the cholesterol will be located in between the tail. Okay? So in the middle over here. Okay? So cholesterol is molecule that has four ring structure. So there is cholesterol here. There's another cholesterol here. Okay. So this cholesterol is present between the tail of the phospholipid bilayers. What is the function of this cholesterol? The cholesterol functions in the cell membrane is to strengthen the cell membrane. Okay, to make the cell membrane become stronger. Okay. So this the structure of the cell membrane. Again, the framework is called the phospholipid bilayers. There are additional molecules, proteins, and cholesterol. Now, remember that the function of the cell membrane is to control the movement of molecules in and out. Now, how this plasma membrane are able to control the movement of molecules. Okay, so this is the framework, which is the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, now for small molecules, hydrophobic, small hydrophobic molecules, okay, like oxygens, carbon dioxide, they can cross the cell membrane easily without any help. Okay, just remember there are more oxygens outside the cell, because inside the cell oxygen will be used for making ATP. So this oxygen have to enter into the cell in order to be used to make ATP. So this oxygen will be able to move or cross the plasma membrane easily. Okay, so this movement of small molecules that can transfer or cross the cell membrane easily is called simple diffusion. Okay, so small molecules like oxygens, carbon dioxide, they move by simple diffusion. Now, how about bigger molecules, like, for example, glucose or sugar? Remember, we need sugar to make ATP, so there will be more sugar outside. Okay? So this sugar has to enter into the cell in order to be used for making ATP. This sugar unable to cross the plasma membrane because they are big molecules. In order to move them, then there will be proteins on the cell membrane. Remember, there are some protein in the cell membrane that will be able to carry this glucose. So this glucose will be carried by this protein, and finally enter into the cell. These proteins that help to move glucose is called transporter. Okay, so the one that transports molecule. The movement is still diffusion because it is from higher concentration to lower concentration. However, this glucose use transporter. Therefore, the movement is called facilitated diffusion. Diffusions of bigger molecule using transporter in this case. Right? So inside the cell, the glucose plus oxygen will be used to make ATP. And then the waste products or the byproduct will be water and carbon dioxide. So therefore, inside our cell, there will be a lot of carbon dioxide. And this carbon dioxide has to be removed from the cell. They have to cross the cell membrane. And then this carbon dioxide will use the same movement like oxygen. It's called a simple diffusion. Okay? So oxygen, carbon dioxide will be using movement is called a simple diffusion. Bigger molecules like glucose using facilitated diffusion. Now, how about ions? So remember, we have a lot of sodium ion outside the cell, and we actually have more potassium ion inside the cell. Okay, so these ions can move in or out from the cell. However, these ions, because ions are polar molecule, it will not be able to cross the plasma membrane. It will be rejected. Now, how they move? There is another type of proteins that will help them to move, and this protein make a channel. Okay, so this protein make a channel. Therefore, this protein is called ion channel. Okay, ion channel. Okay, an ion channel is very specific for specific ions. The one that is used for sodium to enter into the cell, remember, from higher concentration to lower concentration, it is called a sodium channel because it's used by sodium ion. The one that used by potassium, so potassium will be out from the cell because there are more inside the cell. Okay, so this ion channel over here will be called as potassium channel. Okay, and the movement is still the same, is diffusion, because from higher concentration to lower concentration. Therefore, this ion movement is also known as facilitated diffusion because it requires help or facilitation. Okay, so bigger molecule like glucose will move by facilitated diffusion using transporter. Ions will move also by facilitated diffusion using the ion channel. Okay, so this how the molecules can enter or exit the cell. So using simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Now, how about movement of molecules from lower concentration to higher concentration? Okay, so from lower to higher. This is against concentration gradients. Like for example, this one over here, when we see the movement of sodium enter into the cell using the ion channel, okay, by facilitated diffusion, the sodium actually enter 3 sodium in one movement. So there are 3 sodium enter into the cell. Okay. And when potassium exit from the cell, there are only 2 potassium exit the cell. Okay. Now forget about sodium and potassium. Just look the chart of these ions. So this is sodium is positive, potassium also positive. So if you see this movement, then you see that there are 3 positive enter into the cell and only 2 positive exit the cell. What does that mean? Every time there is a movement like this, there will be extra positive, right? Because there are 3 positive in and only 2 positive exit. Of course, the cell will not tolerate that. The cell have to control that inside the cell has to be balanced. There is no additional positive or additional negative. It has to be in homeostasis. Now, how to control this? How to make homeostasis balance? There is a proteins that actually using ATP to pump sodium and potassium. Okay? So this protein is called sodium potassium pump. Okay? So this is the pump, and this pump using ATP. So using ATP. So this pump need energy. So what the pump, the sodium potassium ATP pump do? It will move, okay, pump two potassium in into the cell. Okay, remember there are more potassium inside the cell, so it has to have to use force in order to move this potassium inside. At the same time, this pump will also move three eh, three sodium out. Okay, so if we make another pump over here, then this pump will move two sodium in, I mean potassium in, and move three sodium out. Okay, so there are a lot of sodium outside over here, therefore we need pump in order to move the sodium from inside the cell into exit here into outside the cell. Okay, so this is what we call the active transport. Okay, active transport is the transport that using ATP to transfer molecules in or out. So this is how the cell membrane control the movement of molecules using simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, or active transport. There is another movement of molecules using a vesicle transport. So if it is cell membrane, okay. Remember in the cell membrane, inside the cell, there is a Golgi apparatus that produce the product like hormones. So this hormone carried by vesicle, let's say hormones inside is carried by vesicle, and this hormone will exit the cell using this vesicle. So this is called the vesicle. Okay, so this vesicle will fuse with the plasma membrane and finally will be out from the plasma membrane, will be here. Okay, so this is exit from the cell. So this movement is called exocytosis. The movement of molecules exit the cell using vesicle transport. If that movement is enter into the cell, let's say there is a vesicle outside, and this vesicle want to enter the cell, let's say carry something, maybe enzyme, it enter into the cell using this vesicle. This movement is called the endocytosis. Okay, so this what we call the vesicle transport. That consists of exocytosis and endocytosis. Okay, exo mean exit, endo mean enter. Now, for the endocytosis, there are two types actually. If the cell, like our white blood cell, be like this, actually able to make a mouth structure. Okay, this is mouth structure. Okay, so this is nucleus. This is white blood cell. So this mouth structure will, for example, eat bacteria. Okay, so this mouth structure then will kind of cover this bacteria and then finally eat it and destroy this bacteria. So this is endocytosis, right? Because the bacteria usually enter into the cell and will be destroyed inside the white blood cell. This movement or this type of endocytosis is called phagocytosis. Phago means eat. Okay, so the process of eating foreign cell, like white blood cell eating the bacteria. This is called the phagocytosis. Another type of endocytosis, yeah, if let's say this is a cell and this is the vesicle, and this vesicle just fuse into the cell and finally enter into the cell. So if it is just like this, this movement or this endocytosis is called the pinocytosis. Eh? Pino means drink. Okay, so the cell enter the product or molecules enter into the cell by drinking it. So the cell drink the molecule. Okay, so it's called the pinocytosis. The other one over here, white blood cell, is kind of eating the molecules, in this case bacteria, and it is called the phagocytosis. Both of them are type of endocytosis. So if we make a summary of transport across the membranes, across the cell membranes, okay, then we can divide three types of transport. The first one is called passive transport. Passive transport means the transport that do not require energy. Okay, so this one does not require energy. And this passive transport is divided into three types. The first one is called simple diffusion. Remember, example is oxygen and carbon dioxide movement. which is this oxygen move from higher concentrations outside into lower concentration area inside, just crossing the phospholipid bilayers without any help. The same thing with the carbon dioxide. It will move from inside to outside by just crossing the cell membrane, the phospholipid bilayer. The second one is called the facilitated diffusion. This is the diffusion that require help. Okay? In this case, remember the movement of glucose using transporter, okay, for bigger molecule like glucose, amino acid, okay, or using ion channel. This is for ions like sodium ions, potassium ion, chloride ion, calcium ions. They all use the ion channel. And the movement or the transport is called the facilitated diffusion. One more for passive transport is called osmosis. This is movement of water. Okay, cross the cell membrane using channel is called the aquaporin. Okay, this is the channel for water. Okay, for main channel, aqua, water. So these are the three types of passive transport. The second type of transport is called active transport. This type of active transport requires energy. In this case, energy used by cell is ATP. There are two types: primary active transport. We already give you the example for this one, which is sodium, potassium, ATP pump. The pump that pump 3 sodium out and pump 2 potassium in. The second one of active transport is called the secondary active transport. The third type of transport is called vesicle transport. And remember, this one consists of two types. If it is exit the cell, it's called exocytosis. If it is enter the cell, it's called endocytosis. And endocytosis, it has two types. If it is eating the molecule, it's called phagocytosis. If it is drinking the molecule, it's called pinocytosis. So this is the summary of transport of molecules across the membranes. Again, the simple diffusions, it is movement of molecule from higher concentration to lower concentration without any help. It's just crossing the phospholipid bilayers, and it is done for small hydrophobic molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide. Facilitated diffusion is used by bigger molecules like glucoses and amino acids. They will use the transporter. Or another facilitated diffusion is used by ions, which is using ion channels. Osmosis is spatial movement for water that cross the cell membrane using aqua currents. Active transport, this is the type of transport that require energy. There are two types, primary active transport and secondary active transport. The primary active transport on our cell membrane is the sodium-potassium ATP pump. And the last type of transport is called vesicle transport. There are two types, okay, exocytosis and endocytosis. So this type of transport using vesicle, okay, to transport the molecule, whether exocytosis or endocytosis. We will discuss on the next part about the osmosis and tonicity. Goodbye.